So hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗿𝗲 𝗡𝘂𝗺. I'm a child protection specialist and lead as well of Future Rights. Collectively, we all decided to call this interview Stories from Gaza, Why We Need to Read. And this interview is about young writers from Gaza, stories for change, and voices that rise. So here with us today, we have, here we go with the round of introduction, 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗿𝗲. 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗿𝗲 is a humanitarian. She's been also a child protection specialist. She's an advocate and a blogger. Then we have 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗲 from We Are Not Numbers. She's the director of operations, but she's also a freelance journalist, and she has been and she is writing for 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗿𝗲, New Arab and Middle East Eye. And then last but not least, we have Reem Slim, our youngest today among us. She's a student in English literature. She's also a writer and a translator for We Are Not Numbers, and she wishes to become a novelist. Okay, great. So after this very quick round of introduction, just let me introduce a little bit why we decided to have this interview, and also Reem and 𝗪𝗲, you will talk about We Are Not Numbers later on. Please feel free. Just a few words about Future Rights. We are an initiative, a catalyst for change. We are a newborn, I would say, the very early stage of our initiative. We want to lead change and protect the generations of today and tomorrow by putting at the forefront child and youth-led solutions in the field of human rights, social justice, and protection. This interview falls under the project Voices That Rise, which is to a platform and I would say a space to give visibility to those youth-led solutions again. And that's why we reached out to We Are Not Numbers, and when youth and young people take ownership of their narratives and put at the forefront the experience to inspire change. So before we jump to the questions, just wanted to, of course, remark the fact that we are at 1 year. 1 year of the atrocious conflict that is happening in Gaza, which is also extending to Lebanon. It has already expanded to the West Bank. I want to remark numbers because afterwards we are going to talk about the fact that we are not numbers, but we are talking about more than 4,000 victims, and 11,000 has been women. More than 6,000 are children, 20,000 people who are missing, probably under the rubbles, and the most shockful number is also the fact that we're talking about 186,000, according to Lancet, who are victims of starvation and the lack of health. As a humanitarian, I say that in this year we saw serious human rights violations of international humanitarian law, reaching levels of crimes against humanity. We can say this. The failure to protect, failure to hold responsible and accountable the perpetrators, lack of access to humanitarian aid, and violations not only on civilians who are target, but also on humanitarian personnel. So after this brief introduction to where we are, unfortunately, today, we'll start with some questions, and I will leave the floor entirely to our speakers because I spoke a lot and too much. So the first questions I wanted to ask to you, especially 𝗪𝗲 and 𝗪𝗲, is why there is an urgent need to share the Palestinian narratives and voices, especially through storytelling and personal writing, because this is what we are talking about with the We Are Not Numbers and with the blog of 𝗪𝗲. So who will start first?
I can start, no problem. So when we speak about telling stories of Palestinians and why they're important, It's because the world need to hear from people directly. They need to know what's going on in the ground, and nothing is as powerful as people talking about their daily experiences by themselves, from their own experience, from their own narrative, from what they survive. We have people talking about how they get food, people about talking about how writing about how they get water, grab water so they can drink and wash the dishes and bath during their day. We have people talking about how they lost their flip-flops and they can't replace them. We have people speaking about how they were able to escape and flee the war and how it feels to be outside of their home country during the war. We have people talking about how they use the earth ovens to bake and to cook nowadays, and how they don't have wood even to cook. Usually the mainstream media speak about the overall situation, speak about make it a more political than more humanitarian. When we hear from people directly, it's more humanitarian than it's more political than it's political. In this case, every person can reflect what the Palestinians are living. If I'm a human, you're a human, and you understand what this kind of suffering, because anyone and all over the world or around the world can be a victim of war at any moment if another country decides that they want to launch a war against them. So this is more of a human being speaking to a human being rather than figures, numbers that the mainstream media is mentioning. Apart from this, the war sooner or later will finish, will end. And then we need these stories because they document what was the reality of the situation, what the reality was in Gaza during the wartime. And this will be the archive for the new generations to read about their ancestors and about the older generations and how they survived this horrific war in Gaza.
We will come back to this with another question, exactly the fact of documenting information and keeping memory alive. I was interested in, we'll go now into Ruba and then perhaps back to you, Vala, because it's interesting also to share how We Are Not Numbers came to life, the story of the founder. But going back to, going to Ruba, actually, what is the urgency that you felt in writing a personal story? Because you were in Gaza, and then your blog is about the whole journey and experience that led you ultimately out of Gaza in where you're now in Egypt.
Yeah. First, thank you very much, Smriti, for initiating this. And actually, the main reason I have been doing this is that I've heard a lot of stories from our grandparents before, and what happened with them, and none of that was documented. It's all about the key that they left to go back to their homes. And I had a strong feeling while I was in Gaza that this is really a genocide, meaning that we left our homes without even being prepared. We left everything there, and then we were displaced in another place in Gaza, and then we had to flee to Egypt. And fleeing is not wrong, by the way, because sometimes some people try to show that as a mistake, which is not, because as civilians and as innocent people who are caught in the middle of that, I mean, we have this right. And so I wanted to document what was going on. And I knew, like, there was like a whole month before I started to document that I've noticed that, me myself forget what happens. And that's why I decided to document that. At the beginning, I have so many friends, calling me, asking about details of my life. And every time I say something, I need to interpret and, demonstrate and, explain more and more to them, which couldn't be answered. Like, I couldn't answer for 1 hour for each phone call in the middle of the situation where you don't have access to internet or electricity, and the mobiles are not charged properly. So what I thought was, like, what if I write this down and then send it out to my friends? So I made a small WhatsApp group where I used to send those diaries. And one thing that actually I was doing, for example, is that because we don't have internet access, and we don't have access to, like I would say, the proper access to electricity. So I was sending voice messages to a friend, and she was, writing that down, sending me back that to me again in order to review and send to the group. So it was like at the beginning, it was just something for the close friends. Some
Mm.
of them are coming from different parts of the world, like in Italy, in Sweden, in the US, in Canada, in so many places with colleagues I've worked with before. So I wanted to clarify what's happening with them. And I want them to hear from me because I know if I were killed, I will be just a number. And I didn't want to be just a number. And I wanted to be the voice for those many people, for so many people who couldn't have the chance to express who they are and what they do. So every time I got a chance or a story I hear from the people, whether we are sitting together far away from the internet connection and listening to what happens, the experiences of different people I trust and I know that they are credible. And like if I always kept in mind that like I have to be very precise because one day someone might call and ask for more information, and I wanted them to be over there ready and correct and precise and timely, also timely correct, because I had to ensure that that I record like the date and the day and which day of the genocide that was. So
Hold your thoughts
if-
because I think your information are really useful for the question about preserving
number.
memory and
Okay.
document.
But yeah, but then another thing is that also I wanted to let that out. Like I didn't want to be a number, and I wanted to let that out for the people actually, because I had a strong emotional and psychological toll over my head, and that way it has to be let out in one way or another. So that's why I started and initiated writing.
Great. And we talk about as well the healing as well purpose that might have writing in, especially under siege, certain personal stories. And this will be another question we'll be looking into. But I wanted to
Yes.
go back to 𝗲𝗲, because it's interesting to hear how We Are Not Numbers came to life, because there is a personal story as well there, and there is a personal connection with someone who you will share the name of the journalist as well, who listened at a certain point to voices out of the same narrative and say, no, we need to express a different narrative. So over to you.
So the story of We Are Not Numbers. We Are Not Numbers as a project was based on a story of Ahmed 𝗪𝗲, one of our co-founders, one of the co-founders of We Are Not Numbers. So in 2014, Ahmed lost his brother Ayman to an Israeli missile, and during that time he fell into depression and he couldn't accept the fact that he was killed. During that time, Ahmed met Pam Paley. She's a US journalist who was in Gaza, I think, during that time. And they met up. She encouraged him to write about his story. And he did. And it attracted the attention of the Western media. So everyone was talking about how he lost his brother, what it means to lose a brother, and what it means to live in a war zone. And then this story was a beacon of hope for many, many people in Gaza who decided that they want also to write about their experience, about how they lived in Gaza, about how they survived, about how their daily life, the laughter, the joy, the sad moments, about the blockade, the air, water, their inability to travel and survive like a normal human being all over the world. So that was basically the story behind We Are Not Numbers. Then they decided to call the project We Are Not Numbers, because they don't want to see the people around the world to see Palestine or Palestinians as numbers. It's not about how many were killed, how many were injured, or how many are captivated in Gaza. They want the world to understand that we are people. We have stories behind us. We are still the only occupied nation in the world. It was on October 7th that triggered writers in Gaza to write. It was even before we were not numbers established in 2014. So the stories were there all the time, but it didn't take the world to read more unless October 7th started.
Thank you, Wadha. And actually, this brings us to the second questions. You already, both of you, Ruba and Wadha, anticipated some examples of what it means living in Gaza before the 7th of October and after, because we know that occupation has been long-lasting, unfortunately. So only now we have, as you said, more attention. But again, the attention is very much, and I wanted to provoke in a provocative way to start with lots of numbers, because this is what the media often mentions. So war strategies, access or not access, where the shelling has happened, and again, how many victims and how many civilians. But your stories are also, and here are the second questions, wanting to illuminate a little bit further on also what do we mean by Palestinian culture. And Palestinian culture is captured in your stories with the descriptions of daily routine. It also, because I remember, for example, when reading the blog from Ruba, it's interesting to see, yes, it's the sad moments, because when you are fleeing and when you are under siege, of course, there are sad moments and we are witnessing atrocities, but there's also this resilience in wanting to describe even daily moments of happiness and of gathering with, the relatives and family. So I wanted to, if you could share, maybe Ruba, you and some anecdotes from the blog which you feel people should know. Not everyone who are hearing us today had the chance to read yet your blog, but if you want to share with us like some anecdotes or some particular moments that people out there should understand, what does it mean living in Gaza in this moment. And then Wadha, if you have then after some stories to share.
I mean, there's so many anecdotes in this regard, because, according to the news, there is, for example, this, we are out of water. There isn't running water. There isn't electricity. There isn't internet. Fluctuating prices. So there are so many stories, like how do people give consolation to each other while when they hear about the news of the dead. There are stories, for example, I'll share you some, but I'm just trying to highlight where you could find those. They are because, when this whole genocide started, the Israeli Prime Minister came actually live, and he was saying that he will get Palestinians 50 years back. And so that doesn't mean only that we are cut from the whole world and from the internet, but the whole aspect of life was gone. Like everything that you can hear about, all the inventions that that became part of our daily lives have gone. So there are so many stories in this aspect. But I can tell you about the routines, for example, because before that, people used to wake up in the morning, turn on the gas, and make their own coffee, and that's it. But there are so many stories, like because people actually, which people who have not lived the experience think is that it's completely eating up every one of us, and that's not the case, because we are humans, we remain humans, and there's that human aspect that remain in everyone in us. So, and I feel sorry sometimes that I have to justify even human needs, like the desire to have a cup of coffee, for example, how big, or to cook your food. And in this case, and since we have gone more than 50 years back, actually, we had to go to the market trying to find the wood or the coal, and then go back, finding it, and then we find it in different prices in the market. There isn't one, especially in one's price that is affordable for everyone. So trying to find it in the best prices, and then you go back home and start lighting the fire. And since we have not done this ever before, then we have to learn how to put something to make this through air, for example, to make it more hot. And how, for example, the people, what they have done actually, that there was something that Gaza is famous for, and I put the picture for that on the blog. We call it electrical pan, in which they used to cook the bread. And that electrical pan, I mean, people were so creative in making it suitable, so for example, suitable to put the coal inside it, and then to be able to cook on it. That's also those are good, I mean, this is survival and resilience and everything, but it's in a negative pattern, you know what I mean? Because we shouldn't be doing this in the first place anyway. And also things that we have with, like, for example, there are so many stories, and I can share with you stories of one story of the people at the hospital where I went for there someday. And women were queuing, and having long queues in order to get the shower. I arrived there between 6 and 7 in the morning. I thought I was the first one. And then I found out that people were queuing there from 3 a.m. to get their shower. A shower that they could get only once a week or once every 2 weeks. And even passing by that hospital, I mean, not the hospital, passing by, for example, a school, will make me sick personally. So how would people who are not there, who are there, would be living? I mean, so many, like,
This
there
was
was
quite
there.
striking because when I read your blog, I remember
Yeah.
that using UNRWA facilities and hospitals for
Yes.
they were for all the civilians, as you were saying, they were accessible for having a shower. So it was also impacting people who were actually in the hospital as patients. And in the case of the UNRWA schools, they became
Exactly.
literally houses and hosting like all, civilians, because they had some facilities. So this was something that came to, but
Yes.
I just
And one of the impacts of the wars were because the resources were so little. So because the resources are little, one of the impacts of that is that there's violence among the people, which has also spread. And
the
it's
riots,
because of this.
exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's because of this.
Mm.
So, I mean,
We'll get back to this with other examples later. 𝗪𝗲, what about some stories from writers and thinkers of We Are Not Numbers, even not related to from the 7th October onwards, but even before, or up to you, if what you think is most relevant to share with us today.
So generally speaking, the stories varies. Even before the war started, their stories still about how we survive, how we travel from Gaza, telling the world about that we don't have airport, that we're not allowed to the sea more than 6 miles, and we don't have port. We're not allowed to fly. We have to go every time in a list and wait for maybe a year or more for our name to be issued to travel. So sometimes you have nice stories about people who made it, people who succeeded in their life, about people who graduated, about people who learned something new, people who achieved something in their lives. Now, after when October 7 started, life is more tragic. So before the 7th of October, let's say, we had electricity for between 4 and 8 hours. After October 7, we had no electricity at all. Before October 7, we had water coming once in 3 days. Now we don't have water at all. So life has changed dramatically, and that's why people started writing more. As we have very sad stories and tragic stories of people writing about how they, especially people in the north now, how they buy food, about how they survive, about how they don't have access to aids, about how they're sleeping and running away from one place to another place. You have joyful stories of people. I have a story. I have this story of 𝗪𝗲 𝗡𝑚𝑒𝑠. It's called Love Amidst the Chaos. And this story, Asma was engaged to her fiance before the war started, and they were waiting for the war to end, but the war never ended. And then they had to get married. To get married during the wartime. And she wrote about her experience. About I really love this story. It says, love, if I remember it right, because I read it last time, it said that love is hard to find even before the war, but let alone among the war, when the war started. So it just gives hope for people, that people are getting all together, getting connected more and more during the wartime, because they need emotional support. Generally, the Palestinian culture is a very warm culture. It's family-based culture. Very nice people, hospitalities in every house. I have many friends who came from different areas of the world, especially from Italy. We have lots of delegations and people and activists coming from Italy to Palestine and Gaza, especially. When I was in Gaza in 2022, we had a very big event with our Italian friends, around 70 or 100 people between that number. And they were there. They love the culture. They love the food. They love the experience, because they don't hear from the mainstream media about what's going on in Gaza, how the life was in Gaza. They experience it by themselves. They are able now to tell their stories in Gaza to other people all over the world. So the Palestinian culture, beautiful, nice people, very spontaneous life. It's not the kind of life that you planned before. It's not the kind of materialistic life. It's just a spontaneous life. You wake up, you do what you need to do. Family gathering at the end of the day, family visits, and then you go to sleep. There's nothing like you need to worry about. There are lots of people around to help, especially during the war now. You will find on Facebook, like, many people appealing. I'm looking for this kind of medication. I'm looking for this kind of, I'm looking for water. I'm looking for tent. And you will find many people just, okay, I will send it to you. Send me your location. And you will find people sending and trying to help each other. I'm not saying this is basically limited to Gaza. We have many good people all over the world. But I'm just saying, especially during the wartime, that we have, that a lot of people have gone into the survival mode, and they just panic about anything, and they're trying to seize the opportunities. We still have lots of nice people who are willing to support and help.
Thank you, Wala. I think it's true. I mean, it's what happens in probably there is also a as you said, as a community structure and a family structure that of course, with all the difficulties that come along with the war, but still it enhances a sort of collectiveness and cohesion in like surviving certain circumstances. And for example, when reading some of the parts of Ruba's blog, it was interesting to see these flashbacks because she was revisiting certain places and she was remembering through the visit of relatives the year before how, for example, the shopping complexes or the seaside was nice, and how the kunefe, the best restaurant, or the best kunefe maker. So there was this flashbacks which were really showing that despite being Gaza under the blockade, and we know how it's been impacting transportation, daily life in all different ways, but still there was a way of living thanks to the culture that you just mentioned. I will pass now.
Can I just interrupt you in something? Because, even the family gatherings and all of those things that have been, have been happening in our lives before this genocide started. Actually, for example, I was living with a host family, and there are about 20 to 25 family members at all ages of different generations sitting together every night. No one is allowed to be absent, and they were sharing talks and sharing information, sharing problems, giving advice to each other on what to do the next day. So that kind of family unity was still there.
And this is interesting because it gives you, when we talk about how to look into certain narratives and also in certain support that has been provided, many times we overlook some solutions that are there. And I think that the context that we're having now in Gaza is very peculiar as well, because the humanitarian access is very restricted. So in other contexts, you would have seen, more support, but in this one really is the people having to provide and to find the solutions on their own. I was going to ask Reem now to actually read a story that you wrote about the life in Gaza from your perspective. So if you want to share with us, and of course, if you want to introduce the piece and yourself further, as I did at the beginning, please feel free. So over to you, Reem.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me in this interview. It's important for the world to hear our voice, to know the truth of what is happening in Gaza, because social media hides many facts. Therefore, I wrote my story, but before I read it, I will introduce myself. I write my story for people, especially those who constantly complain about the circumstances of their lives. I tell them in the story that despite the war and the misfortune that happened to us, we are still grateful for what we have and thank God for every day. I fled the war with my family in February and traveled to Egypt after several attempts to travel. But it happened suddenly, as we had lost hope of the travel. But one day, by coincidence, my father was searching for our names in the travelers register and found our names. I remember that at that time that I danced with my younger brothers for joy. Then we traveled in the next day. Now about 8 months have passed since the last time I was in my country. I still miss my previous days where we left everything and didn't bring with us except a few clothes, as we thought that we would return after 2 or 3 months. Although we are safe now, life here is difficult, especially with my father not having a job, so we are suffering from expenses and the high cost of living. I have begun to miss my country and wish to return, but where will I go back when everything is renewed? Nostalgia pushed me to source news and stories about Gaza, which is why I discovered the foundation of We Are Not Number, where I found my passion for writing stories. I wrote 5 stories, including today's story, some pieces of which I will read because it's a little long. If anyone wants to read it in its entirety, I will attach the link for you. The story I wrote had a great impact. As in the beginning, I talked about our neighbor's clothesline. My neighbor used to hang on the laundry on that rope every day, and it made an annoying sound, and I was getting annoyed by it. But the war killed that neighbor, and she no longer existed. I also talked about a letter I wrote to myself, that included a list of my goals that I was supposed to achieve this year, but the war came and I was unable to achieve anything. Finally, about the accident with my finger, as it was damaged during our displacement to my grandmother's house. All these bad things happened to me before I read a book about dancing with life, asking me when was the last time I felt grateful. I asked myself what I had to be grateful for. I wasn't able to answer until I discovered that my neighbor was still alive. Even though she had been thrown into the air by the force of the explosion, she lost her children and her husband and was seriously injured, but she was smiling and thanking God. Here I realized that my suffering was worth nothing in front of this patient woman. And I knew why I should be grateful. Although we are suffering from the same war and genocide, at least my family and I have accept death, even though it was hovering around us all the time. And as long as I'm still alive and breathing, that is enough for me. So we in Gaza no longer dream of anything but living in peace. Our utmost ambition is for the war to end and for us to rest, even if only for a little bit. We don't dream of anything more. We want freedom and security. This is our most simple right. Is it too much for us? It is difficult to achieve so that the war continues for a year. So now I think I will start my story. I will read some pieces of it because it's long. So now I will start. In the heart of Gaza, where the sky trembled with the sounds of explosions and the ground shook under the feet of its people, I sat under the dim moonlight, resting my hand in my hand with a book in my other hand, trying to disconnect from the world around me and escape the grim reality for a little while. A question in the book stopped me. When was the last time you felt grateful in your life? I answered to myself, what should I be grateful for in the midst of this war? Perhaps the only thing I feel grateful for is that I am still alive, and that God has chosen for me to live until this moment. This is despite the smell of the death that I always sense near me, only 4 meters away where the neighbor's house is. All its inhabitants were murdered, with only a few clothes left hanging on the clothesline. That clothesline, whose sound always annoyed me. I would grumble whenever I found my neighbor hanging a laundry on it in front of my bedroom window. Where's she now? I wish she could come back from beneath the earth. How terrifying it is for me when someone I used to see and hear every day dies. Death could have chosen me instead of her, but it left me with life for a reason I still do not understand. I breathed a sigh and closed the book in despair. I began to recall my old memories when I was happy, trying to remember the taste of happiness. What did it taste like, I wonder? A few days later, a stranger knocked on our door. My father went to greet him, only to see the last person he expected to be alive. It was my neighbor. I gaped in shock and went to tell my mother. My mother was shocked when she saw her coming towards us to tell us that she was the sole survivor among her family members. She began to describe what happened to her during the shelling, flying in the sky from the forest for me to fall on a nearby building instead of falling to the ground and dying. I'm still alive. As for my children and husband, God took them, and I am left with no one. She spoke calmly, with a slight smile drawn in her face. What a patient woman! Despite the severe trials and oppression she faced, she still smiled and praised God. I felt how trivial my own suffering was compared to her calamities. Although my finger was damaged, it would eventually heal, but her loss was immense and irreplaceable. She became both a widow and bereaved in one stroke. My neighbor didn't come to our house just to tell her painful story, but to make us appreciate the blessing we have and realize that our situation is much better than others. Even though we all suffered from the same condition in this war, at least all my family members are safe, and that's enough for me. I think that's enough. Or thank you.
Thank you so much, Reem.
Is there?
It was like few
You're
acts,
welcome.
but you really, even if you chose only few, paragraphs or few lines, it really gave the entire picture of what what the intention is behind your story. And of course, at the end, we're going to remind, everyone where they can go and read the entire story. And also because it's different when you are listening to it and when you're reading it. And I'm sure that they will really enjoy. And
Yeah, it's different.
and thank you so much. And thank you also for sharing because you did anticipate a little bit also the next question. And I would then just leave it with your reply, because you already mentioned what, as a youth, you will, you are asking for is just security, to leave and be able to return to your land and just continue writing your stories and fulfill your dreams as any other youth around the world. So I think that We Are Not Numbers is a really great opportunity to, with your stories, is already spreading out the message that youth are trying to send out. And thank you for sharing as well this, starting from away and then changing the point of view throughout this experience and going back to your story different. So thank you so much, Reem.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I think that is interesting, and you already mentioned how, and we saw earlier with the story of Reem, how therapeutical is anyhow writing, because Ruba, you mentioned you had you were in distress, and that helping you to write the stories and the incidents were perhaps grounding you, but also helping you to actually document something that your grandparents, couldn't document. I'm wondering if you and 𝑤Ⅎ𝑒𝑛, in terms of representing other writers, if there is a therapeutical scope behind as well, letting out and keeping journals and writing the stories.
You mean writing was good for me, or
Yeah.
the thing is?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, of course, of course, because I wanted to share all those stories with my friends and my colleagues from work with because of like I've mentioned before, because they're asking me so many questions that that couldn't be answered in one simple answer. And then ever since, when they ask a question and you answer, there is, tens of questions after you give your answer regarding your answer. So that was not practical because I wanted to share that in a good and structured manner, something that they can refer to and read and know exactly what the situation is like. And I wanted to share their stories because in case something happens with me, I wanted, everyone I know to know what I've been going through. At a point that, as also like I mentioned before, like because there was no internet connection, there's no electricity. So I needed to send out my voice messages to a friend who was, writing the script of what I was saying, and then she was sending that back to me, and I just made the modifications and sent that to her. And if I have so many thoughts and so many things to tell the world about or to tell my friends about, I would be sending the voice messages to another friend. So in case something happens with me, they know how to cooperate. They had each other contact, so they knew what to do. And again, because that's also a relief, that's also answering so many questions, making because behind the news the news is just to give you the overall idea, but behind the news there are so many details that everyone is living. So I wanted to share that with every friend that I had because that's what helped them understand what is it to have to live that to live that in our lives.
So it was interesting to hear how this new digital era actually is enhancing as well a different way of exchanging messages. You were mentioning about sharing, voice messages. This years and many years ago, probably at the time of your
Not
grandparents, it was
available.
not possible. So
Yeah.
sometimes there are pros and cons, but I believe that in this case it has been useful for you to be connected somehow and share your voices with other people that who capture these messages. While
But
we have
if I may interrupt you, but bearing in mind that even though with the little bit of phone charging that I had, with a little bit of of time of in order for me to when I'm connected, because even though we had 3, 4 different ways of being connected with the internet, I had only 1 hour a day or less. So I had to manage all that within 1 hour.
This is something I mean, quite astonishing because we don't think about it very much. For example, when we look at journaling or keeping stories under, under siege, is something that has been taking place since all the wars and conflicts since ever. Second and First World War, we see the letters of, soldiers. We see again letters where we are describing what is happening, or journal and diary of civilians keeping track of their daily life. So it's definitely therapeutical, but it's also a way of documenting and keeping memory. If this then is going to build a collective memory, we don't know this, but definitely there is an attempt in documenting and in and making a little bit of
Yes.
evidence.
Yes,
And
and one small thing, just, because I wanted to add this because we realized, you will not find anyone who is more politically aware of the situation as the Palestinians. And we knew from the very beginning that the war was against the civilians, including the journalists. So we knew that will not be covered. So we had to take the part of this responsibility actually as our job, and it's part of the motivation that we had at that time in order to write.
as civilians, exactly, so to document as well. Wala, any examples from your side?
I'll just mention
Again, therapeutical as well, and memory.
I'll
build.
just mention quickly a conversation with my sister a couple of days ago. She said she was with my grandma. My grandma, she witnessed the 1948 Nakba in Gaza, and they were together in 𝗪𝗲 𝗔𝗿𝗲. She went to visit her. She asked her how was to compare this war with the 1948. She told her that this is a lot worse. This is far worse of what they have witnessed in 1948. What my grandma said that during the 1948, they thought that they are just leaving for a couple of days and they're coming back. This was what the Israeli forces informed them at that time, that they're doing an operation, that they will come back, but they never came back. Unfortunately, from the 1948, we don't have many stories documenting what the people have gone through. We don't have many stories documenting how they managed to run away, or how they survived, even how they started all over again. My grandma, my grandma's family, from both sides, from my parental sides, they came to Gaza in 1948, so they had to start all over again from the scratch and build their lives and start their education from the scratch to survive. These stories were not documented. When we go to the archive, we barely have anything documented to tell the world about later, or for people who want to read now about October 7, if they want to read the same about 1948, we don't have such stories. These stories are really important because they will eventually be in the archive sooner or later for people, for the new generation, for the people in the West to go and try it. The good thing now is that we have, in 1948, we didn't have people speaking in English. We barely had any one of the Palestinians speaking in English, and they weren't able to convey to the world directly their message, what they have gone through. That we always had some mediators in between talking on the Palestinians' behalf. Now we don't have this. Now we have our Palestinian writers. They speak English. They're able to tell the world their message. The world can hear directly from them. If anyone wants to learn anything about the situation in Gaza, it's easy to connect to them on the through the internet and just Facebook and social media platforms, and just ask how the situation look like, or just read their stories, and they can understand their message. I endorse what Ruba said about the systematic targeting of journalists. We're not numbers. We lost 4 of our journalists and writers, great people that they had passions and dreams for the future. Those people are gone, but their message wasn't gone because, for example, you have Mohammed Hammo. He's one of our most intelligent writers at We're Not Numbers. He was killed along with his family in an Israeli airstrike on their house. Now we have many stories of our writers attributing him and writing about how he was and how he was killed, how he had dreams and ambitions for the future. So we need more people to speak. Now we are seeing the North is being destroyed even worse than when the war started initially. And we don't have many people, unfortunately, covering what's going on. We need more writers and more journalists to cover, and we're willing to train them to write and tell the world what's going on. This is only one example of many examples. Palestinians has been suffering for a long time. It's so sad that it took October 7th to get the attention of the world towards what's going on in Gaza, destruction of 80% of the infrastructure, the killing of over 40,000 people, exceeded the number, and is expected to reach 180,000 more. Half of it, if not more, is our children and women. This war has costed so much lives and took the dreams of so many people. I hope at least that we have more people who are able to advocate for Palestine and continue supporting the Palestinian rights. We need more people. We need more collaboration on the international level, definitely.
Voila, you already answered my final question. Thank you so much, because you're already sending out a message and what should be done. I will ask the same as well to Rube at this point. And voila, just one note, because I remember you telling me before the interview that We Are Not Numbers is also looking actively to support people in Palestine, not just offering the opportunity for youth from Gaza to become writers and you know and be able to share their voices, and as you said, through English, reach out to a different sort of audience. But I know that you're running some projects as well with your youth, so this would be interesting to know a little bit more about it. And then Ruba, I will leave it to you with what, like Wala said, what is it the international community, and also when we are looking at the youth of Palestine, should be actually listening to and doing differently. So Wala, first you, and then Ruba.
So We're Not Numbers. It started as a voluntary project. So we train the writers. We take 2 cohorts per year. Each cohort is between 30 to 60 people. We train them in human rights advocacy, debate, history of Palestine, and then pitch writing, story writing, personal story writing, and feature story writing as well. And then after they finish their training with We're Not Numbers, it's 6 months of training, then we connect them to mentors from English-speaking countries, and they together write their stories and publish them on We're Not Numbers website. How we help then after this, those writers go wild to different websites, different news agencies like Montewise, Electronic Intifada, Palestinian Chronicles, WR, Washington Reports of Middle East Affairs, the Middle East Eye. They go and try. We give them the platform to go and continue their initiatives and continue writing and advocating for Palestine. Now, before the war, we didn't pay for these stories. Like, we just trained them and they how to write. Now that the war started, we decided that we will reimburse them. We will pay for their stories. They publish with We're Not Numbers. So this is one of the, because of, the situation is very bad back home, and the food prices are 10 times more than they used to be. So we wanted to financially support them to be able to survive. Second thing, with We're Not Numbers, as volunteers, we have participated in different initiatives. One of them was the solar panels. So we were able to purchase some solar panels locally from Gaza and distribute it to people who live in tents at this moment. So this was with general support from Australia and Singapore. So we purchased these solar panels distributed to people, especially during Ramadan time. Now, the second initiative, that's one of our biggest initiatives, is the scholarship initiative. And that's, we are helping Palestinian students basically from We're Not Numbers, but we have also many of them who are not from We're Not Numbers to find a scholarship to continue their education and travel outside of Gaza to get this opportunity. We did a great job. Many of them have traveled to the US and Ireland, here where I stay at this moment, and different other countries. We are still in contact and touch. We have some of them in Gaza. We're not able to evacuate, unfortunately, due to the closure of the border. Hopefully we will manage this during next year. The final project is the food project. The food is essential. It's so much needed. Many people are suffering malnutrition, and the only way to support these people is by providing some healthy food. So what we did is that provide only fresh vegetables and fruits, plus some meat from time to time for people in 𝑚𝑒𝑑𝑖𝑎 refugee camp. Especially 𝗪𝗲 camp, where it's basically it's created for orphans, for children who lost one or both of their parents, and we do provide them with fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, meat, fish from time to time, just to help them to survive and get the nutrients they need to for a healthy body. This project is, I see this project as one of the most important ones. The idea came first because my parents were staying in 𝗪𝗲, and that time they had no access to food or water or anything. So we started developing this project with the help of some donors, and we were able to create some clay ovens for them. We purchased water tanks in the camp and managed to fill them in with the help of our friends who are running some water projects in Gaza. And finally, we decided that we want to provide food from time to time. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive to purchase food at this stage. So even if the vegetables and the fruits and the meat gets into Gaza, it's so hard for people to buy them. So we're trying is just to help them by buying them and then distributing it for free, or even sometimes cooking for them and just deliver ready-made meals.
Thank you, Wala. That's really impressive. Thank you so much. Ruba, what's your final note in terms of what is it that, again, international community and humanitarians should look into and listen to from your perspective and your experience with youth as well?
Well, I have experienced working with different NGOs, INGOs, with the UN agencies. So I have quite this collective understanding of how that sector works in Gaza. And what I would really want is to have plans for the people in Gaza more rooted. Like I want it to come from the people. I want it to be from the bottom up, and not based on some organizations' unique experience and understanding of the field, which is respected. But sometimes people get to you with the solutions and with the problems, and then the solutions to those problems without even seeking for those solutions. So what I was hoping is that to have those plans more community based on real needs assessment on the grounds, and then those initiatives will come up. Another thing I would suggest, and that was inspired with what Wala has just said, because since they are caring a lot about the people in Gaza and what they are going through. I just want to say that the people outside Gaza who fled also this genocide have some other problems. And if you expand over there, it would be great for We Are Not Numbers or any other organizations, because the support is needed over there. And people have, left everything that they have behind in Gaza, or their own property. They just, sold their own cars, all those things. So people would need to have that. Another project is that, I would really work with any organization, or like I wanted to have, there are so many titles or like a catchy sentence that are coming up behind each story. Those catchy sentences should be collected, and then in 2 or 3 lines we need to know the story, because there are so many stories that, I mean, even if thousands of journalists and writers could collect all, will not be able to collect all that. So at least we need something, because those will be used one day for in order to raise awareness, whether that's going to be through drama or through theater work or whatsoever. So we need to have as many of those as possible in order to, and then we'll have the time to write. But right now we need to find some way to draft what's going on, and not just to have those, like, what I did was, a keen, neat writing that I took my time to document my own experience. But we need to do more on that. We need to work the more, more on that. And to give also, because actually I would applaud the NGO sector so much for the work that they have done in Gaza, and I believe there should be more work actually from the international organizations, and build on mutual learning regarding what's happening over there and the experiences that people are getting over there in Gaza, in order to make it really mutual learning and mutual learning, I would call it. on what's happening over there. That's apart from, like, also there are calls, like, I would really call for ending the war, this genocide immediately, of course. And, to enter the humanitarian assistance without any condition immediately. But I know that many are asking for this now, but for the future, that's what I hope that will happen.
Thank you, Ruba. I think that thank you all. We will conclude then with I know with a reading from Ruba. Before that, I would like to spend a few words, not only saying thank you to each of you for having shared your story. I hope this is going to be an opportunity for the people out there to listen to your story, to get to know each of you, and to amplify really the work and the opinion that you have, reaching further out. So this is something that we really strongly, aim for with this interview. And secondly, as a child protection specialist and a humanitarian, I would just conclude saying that we need to start feeling a little bit uncomfortable if we are not already uncomfortable, but I don't think it's enough. There's been a catastrophic failure of the work that something has been left, but the vision and the mission we had around human rights and humanitarian law has completely been destroyed. And so it's an important turning point. And I think that collectively we need to take a stand and make things differently, because at the end, as a person who did study human rights and conflict management and had dreams and and values, even for me as well as for other colleagues, this is absolutely something that is just revealing all those narratives that we just undervalue, didn't take into consideration, and now we just need to turn the other side of the coin and hope that things needs to will change. We'll hear, Ruba, your story, and then after that we'll just say bye, and in the meantime, thank you to all of you.
Oh, you're welcome. Actually, that was from one of my blogs called Crying, and I wrote it because I was, my feelings at that time were on hold. So I didn't even cry, but there were 3 times that I was able to finally cry. And that time, like, it's in the blog, so you can go back to it and read it. But because I'm dedicating this reading to my friend Iman, who also was killed during this genocide. And at that time, we didn't have internet, so I didn't know that it was called genocide. But, I called it a war. But I'm going to read it. I'm going to say a war, but whenever I say a war, please know that it's a genocide. So I will start from here because it's the second story. So I was saying there was another time throughout this war, not only I have cried, but also I haven't been able to sleep. I had a coworker who called Iman, who called me asking about another coworker who was closest to my heart. She asked me if I heard from Iman, and I said, not for the last couple of days. Iman was my best coworker and my close friends outside the office. She was the most gentle, friendly, generous, and open-minded friend. She was very respectful inside and the office and supportive outside the office. It took us less than a week in the 2 years we knew each other to become friends. We used to go shopping together, celebrate special days together. We bought things for our homes, and for the children, and for my home as well together. Most of the time, I used to drive her home after office hours, and we used to sing our songs way back. She was the only one whom I borrowed money from, and I lent her money to. We were also participating in WhatsApp group to read the Quran. Iman was an architectural engineer holding MA degree. She was an achiever in every aspect of her life. She had two children who were 10 and 11, who enjoyed swimming and advanced IT courses. The last time I met Iman, she showed me pictures of her wedding during her wedding party, and I was telling her that we must get in shape as soon as possible. With her unforgettable smile, she told me she was planning to get pregnant because she wanted to have a third baby. The day she passed away, she sent me an SMS messaging saying that she wanted to find an apartment to stay in as her entire building was bombed. I sent her a message back saying, "My house is yours until you find an apartment." But she never answered. I thought she did not receive my message because she did not answer back. But then I never received any answer again. Iman was gone together with her two children. She preferred to help me move from one place to another than being in a party. She was trying to matchmake my brothers and wanted to attend their wedding parties. In spite of that, I couldn't be with her and her family and sisters and in-laws where they were killed together. She was lying under rubble before she died. Did she die immediately? Did she see her children dead? Nobody will ever know. You will remain beautiful memory, and I will never forget her beautiful singing. And yes, good people leave us quickly. Love you, dear, until we meet again.
Thank you all for attending, and I will make sure that your stories reaches by sharing as well. We Are Not Numbers website and Ream as well, your story, the full link where people can go and read further together with other colleagues and writers of yours, and of course Ruba, that I know you are having the blog and the link, and we'll be continue sharing and keep up with the great work that you are doing. And from my side, I'm not, I've got to know your stories, and this changed very much the way, I was perceiving, as well as many other ordinary people, because people are made of communities, of students, and, the civil society is large. And from this side, I can tell you that all the events that we had where we already started reading some of the stories did change quite extensively the perception, and also fundraising for, continuing you to tell the story. So thank you very much. And I'll hope to read you again pretty soon then.
Thank you
Okay.
very much, Zuhdi. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.